Hello, everyone, and welcome to the week of learning to read. So, we are going to talk about how we've seen this marvelous development in this child and their acquisition of spoken language, and what are the next steps as they moved into school. There is this ongoing growth of their spoken language, just as there is the ongoing growth of their reading and written language, and them learning that written language has its own purposes and is a skill that they will acquire over time. So again, some vocabulary for you to pay attention to as we're moving through this week. So we've talked a lot about how during the sensory motor period, during the pre-operational period, children's brains are growing very, very quickly. They have a time clock of learning new motor skills, new linguistic skills, new cognitive skills. And we're going to see a great growth in all of these over the next, continuing over the next few years. As children first learn to speak, they are learning to manage and control their articulators and the purposeful sounds. We've talked about in the past how their first sounds are associated with objects and people that are really important to them. We call it salient, something that is meaningful to the child. That tends to be the first words that we hear. And they begin to use their language to interact with their world around them. So some of the design features of language that you need to know at this point, because it's going to matter, is how they learn written language too. Design features are things that we know to be true about how language is learned and what is innate about language. One of them is specialization, in that speech is designed specifically for communication. Speech is something that is a unique human function, and its only purpose is to communicate with others. Traditional transmission implies that humans are biologically and genetically pre-wired to speak. We certainly are impacted by our environment, as we've talked repeatedly over the weeks. But regardless of the environment, children learn to speak. They still learn to communicate. Learnability is the combination of the environment and those genetically and biologically innate abilities that interact together because the child is socially motivated to communicate and produce language. The nature of language is its learnability because of a child's desire to have social communication with others. But not so for the other piece of communication, which is our written language. Now, while children grow, they have interest in what the parents are writing down. They show interest in parents holding the pen. They want to copy and imitate strokes that they see parents making. It is valuable to children because it's valued by their models. If children see adults reading, they tend to value the written word. But unlike speech and language, reading and writing are not innate. They are not natural. They are not genetically inclined to do this, other than to follow the model of those around them. Reading and writing are, for one, more complex. The acquisition of written language does happen in stages, just like spoken language does. And we're going to take a little bit of a look about how that process of understanding written language happens in young children. Think too about what needs to be in place before a child can begin to master reading and writing. Babies babble sound because they have the parts in place to do that. They're exploring their environment through their motor system, through their sensory system. But all of the motor skills that are necessary for written language and perceptual skills that are necessary for written language are not yet in place until the school age. So mastering written language takes more time. It's built on the principle of distancing, and we'll talk about that more in a little bit. But essentially what distancing is the distance between the actual object and then the symbols that we use to represent that object. So certainly a word is a type of symbol that we use to represent an object, but then the written symbols associated with that word are also associated with the object. Children need to have mastered fine motor control necessary to establish print and to copy print. And there are prerequisites that must be acquired along the way in order for them to be cognitively ready to manage the written word. And just like in many of the weeks we've talked about before, the home environment is an incredibly important factor in the child's success. In fact, it's the single most important factor. Children who are exposed to literature within their environment are more likely to be early readers or to value literature. Children who are read too early and are read too often are often the good readers themselves. So what are the prerequisites to reading? Well, certainly we talked about the motor skill development, right? And we've talked about the fact that they have to have established language of some kind. They have to have the basics of communication. Literacy skills are impacted by the caregiver and the environment. And what we know is that the caregiver impacts the child in many ways, not only just in how they're reading to the child and what they're reading, but that they read early and often. So to the babies, to the toddlers, that we read early and often to them to establish these strong literacy skills because there are precursors that they're learning along the way. Finger plays, rhymes, and songs play an important part in learning to read because they're built on prosody, on rhyme, on rhythm. It's a way of playing with the language. All of these are necessary in order for a child to learn how to read well. And the other primary prerequisite for learning to read is phonological awareness. Phonological awareness is a big umbrella term in which there are several other skills embedded. Phonological awareness includes being aware of words and syllables, understanding that a dog is a word, that popcorn has a couple of beats to it, so they're aware of the syllabication. Phonological awareness includes the ability to identify how words start, so the first sounds in word, the end sounds in words. It involves them learning how to rhyme, that they know that cat, bat, and hat rhyme, that they know that and have knowledge of phonemic awareness. Now, phonemic awareness is a piece of phonological awareness. It's one of the components. So we'll talk about each of these. Phonological awareness, as we just mentioned, embodies word awareness. And that develops from that child being able to see the written word. So that's that importance of reading to the very young child, the infant, the toddler, the preschooler, that they start to make a connection between what they see in an image and what they see as a printed word. So here begins the principle of distancing. What principle of distancing is, it's a cognitive development that represents how learning based on experiences provides the child or the individual an ability to understand a progressive representation of a real object to words, images, and letters. So a dog that the child sees in their home is connected to the word dog, which is then connected to a picture of a dog, which is then connected to a line drawing of a dog, which is then connected to the letters DOG that represent dog. Each of those is a distance from the original object, but still represents the original object. So babies explore their world. They touch, they smell, and they learn what dog is. And by parents repeatedly using that term dog when they see their puppy running around, baby learns that the sound combination dog equals what they know is the furry creature running around the room. And then that parent again starts to point to pictures in books and point and say dog using that same sound combination. Then parent asks baby, show me dog, and baby points to the picture, but the pictures may represent something different than their dog. They start to make the association, building that schema. Do you remember we talked about that? They start to build the schema. The dog means more than just their dog, that there's representations of what dog looks like and what dog is. And that moves into animated representations of dog, a line drawing of dog, eventually to the written word. And we have distancing. Another feature of phonological awareness is syllabication, or the awareness of syllables. So there are rules in the English language that children learn over time. Again, as they're building the idea of syllabication, they learn that every syllable must have a vowel, and that the number of sounds in a word is the same as the number of syllables, and that the syllable is never split. So you wouldn't, they understand that you don't take and then p, and then corn. They get it. Pop, corn, slides together. Excuse me. Rhyming is another development of phonological awareness. And this has 3 stages. First, the rhyme is presented so the child can say what they hear. And then you can say, okay, well, tell me which 2 words rhyme. Hat, cat, and pop. And they can pick the 2 that sound the same. And then the child eventually develops to the place where you can give them a word. Tell me a word that rhymes with cat. And they can create a word that rhymes with cat based off of their own ability to create rhyme. So do you see the importance here of those finger plays, the songs, the rhymes? Like 5 little ducks went out one day over the hill and far away. So away and day, they start to get and understand that these words that we give rhyme and rhythm to rhyme as individual words. Children start to learn onset and final sounds, or coda. The onset is how the words start. And so they start to identify all words that start with the same sound, such as in this one that's on the board, Adam's alligator always asks for abalone. It teaches them that we can focus on one sound at a time within a word. And at the same time, they are also building their knowledge of how words end, because, again, they're identifying individual sounds within the word. Phonemic awareness is a piece of, again, a sub-skill of phonological awareness, and it is one of the prerequisites to reading. In order to develop strong reading skills, phonemic awareness must be in place. And what is phonemic awareness? So phonemic awareness is the ability to identify and manipulate the smallest units of sound that make up words. So while we talked about syllabication and rhyme being the whole word, that's phonological awareness. Phonemic awareness is those little parts of the word, so the phonemes themselves. So some of the pieces to phonemic awareness are being able to isolate sounds. So being able to say p, and to just identify that p in and of itself is a sound. When it comes to being able to identify how letters or how words start with a particular letter or end with a particular letter. Find all the words that end with b, and children can sound out the words or listen to the words tub, cab, rib, and they can identify which ones have the b sound in them. Being able to blend. So when if I say um, words like d, g, the child can blend those together auditorily and go dog. So if I can do that repeatedly with other words, I say, what word am I saying? S, it, and the child can say sit. They have used blending. Phoneme segmentation is kind of the opposite of that. That's taking out the sounds in the word and separating them into those isolated sounds. So um, knowing that b, l, k has 4 sounds, that they can isolate each one of those sounds individually. And then deletion is once they can isolate the sounds individually, they can then manipulate it. So I can say smile, don't say s, and the child would reply mile. I could say smile, don't say and the child might say sile. Being able to manipulate the sounds within the words, again, is a form of phonemic awareness. So these skills are necessary in order for a child to learn how to read. So phoneme blending looks like this. K, a, t is cat. Phoneme deletion is say cat, don't say t, add p, cap. So reading is not something that just happens. Just like when we're learning how to talk, reading happens over time and it is a process. I don't think that comes as a surprise to any of you because you've watched your own young children or been around children watching them read. There are some important frames or windows of opportunity for learning to read and learning language. And the pre-operational stage from Piaget's theory of cognitive development, that stage that happens between 2 to 7 years old, this is where the greatest amount of language growth occurs. And it's during this time that symbolic language, that distance learning, that being able to distance from the real object happens, and the child begins to read. It's a busy time for language. We're going to explore more of the reading process in the next week. Have a great night.